Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. The Secret Doctrine. Extracts from an Eastern private commentary, hitherto secret. The initial existence, in the first twilight of the Mahamanvantara after the Mahapralaya that follows every age of Brahma, is a conscious spiritual quality. In the manifested world's solar systems, it is, in its objective subjectivity, like the film from a divine breath to the gaze of the entranced seer. It spreads as it issues from Laya throughout infinity as a colorless spiritual fluid. It is on the seventh plane, and in its seventh state, in our planetary world. It is substance to our spiritual sight. It cannot be called so by men in their waking state, therefore they have named it in their ignorance God Spirit. It exists everywhere and forms the first Upadhi foundation on which our world's solar system is built. Outside the latter, it is to be found in its pristine purity only between the solar systems or the stars of the universe, the worlds already formed or forming, those in Laya resting meanwhile in its bosom. As its substance is of a different kind from that known on earth, the inhabitants of the latter, seeing through it, believe in their illusion and ignorance, that it is empty space. There is not one finger's breadth angula of void space in the whole boundless universe. Matter or substance is septenary within our world, as it is so beyond it. Moreover, each of its states or principles is graduated into 7 degrees of density. Surya the sun, in its visible reflection, exhibits the first or lowest state of the 7th, the highest state of the universal presence, the pure of the pure, the first manifested breath of the ever unmanifested Sat Being-ness. All the central physical or objective suns are in their substance the lowest state of the first principle of the breath. Nor are any of these any more than the reflections of their primaries, which are concealed from the gaze of all but the Dayan Chohans, whose corporeal substance belongs to the 5th division of the 7th principle of the mother substance, and is, therefore, 4 degrees higher than the solar reflected substance. As there are 7 dhatu principal substances in the human body, so there are 7 forces in man, and in all nature. The real substance of the concealed sun is nucleus of mother substance. It is the heart and matrix of all the living and existing forces in our solar universe. It is the kernel from which proceed to spread on their cyclic journeys all the powers that set in action the atoms, in their functional duties, and the focus, within which they again meet in their 7th essence every 11th year. He who tells thee he has seen the sun, laugh at him, as if he had said that the sun moves really onward in his diurnal path. It is on account of his septenary nature that the sun is spoken of by the ancients as one who is driven by 7 horses equal to the meters of the Vedas, or, again, that, though he is identified with the 7 gana classes of being in his orb, he is distinct from them, as he is, indeed, as also that he has 7 rays, as indeed he has. The 7 beings in the sun are the 7 holy ones, self-born from the inherent power in the matrix of mother substance. It is they who send the 7 principal forces, called rays, which at the beginning of Pralaya will center into 7 new suns for the next Manvantara. The energy, from which they spring into conscious existence in every sun, is what some people call Vishnu, which is the breath of the absoluteness. We call it the one manifested life itself, a reflection of the absolute. The latter must never be mentioned in words or speech, lest it should take away some of our spiritual energies that aspire towards its state, gravitating ever toward unto it spiritually, as the whole physical universe gravitates towards its manifested center cosmically. The former the initial existence which may be called, while in this state of being, the one life, is, as explained, a film for creative or formative purposes. It manifests in 7 states, which, with their septenary subdivisions, are the 49 fires mentioned in sacred books. The first is the mother prima materia. Separating itself into its primary 7 states, it proceeds down cyclically, when having consolidated itself in its last principle, as gross matter, it revolves around itself and informs, with the 7th emanation of the last, the first and the lowest element, the serpent biting its own tail. In the hierarchy or order of being, the 7th emanation of her last principle is A. In the mineral, the spark that lies latent in it, and is called to its evanescent being by the positive awakening the negative and so forth. B. In the plant, it is that vital and intelligent force which informs the seed and develops it into the blade of grass, or the root and sapling. It is the germ which becomes the upadhi of the 7 principles of the thing it resides in, shooting them out as the latter grows and develops. C. In every animal, it does the same. It is its life principle and vital power, its instinct and qualities, its characteristics and special idiosyncrasies. D. To man, it gives all that it bestows on all the rest of the manifested units in nature, but develops, furthermore, the reflection of all its 49 fires in him. Each of his 7 principles is an heir in full to, and a partaker of, the 7 principles of the Great Mother. The breath of her first principle is his spirit Atma. Her second principle is Buddhi soul. We call it, erroneously, the 7th. The third furnishes him with the brain stuff on the physical plane, and with the mind that moves it, which is the human soul. HPB according to his organic capacities. E. It is the guiding force in the cosmic and terrestrial elements. It resides in the fire provoked out of its latent into active being, for the whole of the 7 subdivisions of the principle reside in the terrestrial fire. It whirls in the breeze, blows with the hurricane, and sets the air in motion, which element participates in one of its principles also. Proceeding cyclically, it regulates the motion of the water, attracts and repels the waves, according to fixed laws, of which its 7th principle is the informing soul. F. Its 4 higher principles contain the germ that develops into the cosmic gods. Its 3 lower ones breed the lives of the elements elementals. G. In our solar world, the one existence is heaven and earth, the root and the flower, the action and the thought. It is in the sun, and is as present in the glow-worm. Not an atom can escape it. Therefore, the ancient sages have wisely called it the manifested God in nature. It may be interesting, in this connection, to remind the reader of what T. Barrow said of the forces mystically defined. 312 Kanya, the 6th sign of the zodiac, or Virgo, means a virgin, and represents Shakti or Mahamaya. The sign in question is the 6th Rashi or division, and indicates that there are 6 primary forces in nature synthesized by the 7th. These Shaktis stand as follows. 1. Parashakti. Literally the great or supreme force or power. It means and includes the powers of light and heat. 2. Jnana Shakti. Literally the power of intellect, of real wisdom or knowledge. It has 2 aspects. 1. The following are some of its manifestations when placed under the influence or control of material conditions. A. The power of the mind in interpreting our sensations. B. Its power in recalling past ideas, memory, and raising future expectation. C. Its power is exhibited in what are called by modern psychologists the laws of association, which enables it to form persisting connections between various groups of sensations and possibilities of sensations, and thus generate the notion or idea of an external object. D. Its power in connecting our ideas together by the mysterious link of memory, and thus generating the notion of self or individuality. 2. The following are some of its manifestations when liberated from the bonds of matter. A. Clairvoyance. B. Psychometry. 3. Ichcha Shakti. Literally the power of the will. Its most ordinary manifestation is the generation of certain nerve currents, which set in motion such muscles as are required for the accomplishment of the desired object. 4. Kriya Shakti. The mysterious power of thought which enables it to produce external, perceptible, phenomenal results by its own inherent energy. The ancients held that any idea will manifest itself externally if one's attention is deeply concentrated upon it. Similarly, an intense volition will be followed by the desired result. A yogi generally performs his wonders by means of Ichcha Shakti and Kriya Shakti. 5. Kundalini Shakti. The power or force which moves in a serpentine or curved path. It is the universal life principle which everywhere manifests in nature. This force includes the two great forces of attraction and repulsion. Electricity and magnetism are but manifestations of it. This is the power which brings about that continuous adjustment of internal relations to external relations, which is the essence of life, according to Herbert Spencer, and that continuous adjustment of external relations to internal relations, which is the basis of transmigration of souls, punarjanman, rebirth, in the doctrines of the ancient Hindu philosophers. A yogi must thoroughly subjugate this power or force before he can attain moksha. 6. Mantrika Shakti. Literally the force or power of letters, speech or music. The whole of the ancient mantra shastra has this force or power in all its manifestations for its subject matter. The influence of its music is one of its ordinary manifestations. The power of the mirific ineffable name is the crown of this Shakti. Modern science has but partly investigated the first, second and fifth of the forces or powers above named, but is altogether in the dark as regards the remaining powers. The 6 forces are in their unity represented by the astral light Diviprakriti, the 7th, the light of the Logos. The above is quoted to show the real Hindu ideas on the subject. It is all esoteric, though not covering the 10th part of what might be said. For one thing, the 6 names of the 6 forces mentioned are those of the 6 hierarchies of Dayan Chohans, synthesized by their primary, the 7th who personify the 5th principle of cosmic nature, or of the mother in its mystical sense. The enumeration alone of the yoga powers would require 10 volumes. Each of these forces has a living conscious entity at its head, of which entity it is an emanation. But let us compare with the commentary above cited the words of Hermes, the thrice great. The creation of life by the sun is as continuous as his light, nothing arrests or limits it. Around him, like an army of satellites, are innumerable choirs of genii. These dwell in the neighborhood of the immortals, and thence watch over human things. They fulfill the will of the gods' karma by means of storms, tempests, transitions of fire and earthquakes, likewise by famines and wars, for the punishment of impiety. It is the sun who preserves and nourishes all creatures, and, even as the ideal world, which environs the sensible world, fills this last with the plenitude and universal variety of forms, so also the sun, enfolding all in his light, accomplishes everywhere the birth and development of creatures. Under his orders is the choir of the genii, or rather the choirs, for there are many and diverse, and their number corresponds to that of the stars. Every star has its genii, good and evil by nature, or rather by their operation, for operation is the essence of the genii. All these genii preside over mundane affairs. They shake and overthrow the constitution of states and of individuals. They imprint their likeness on our souls. They are present in our nerves, our marrow, our veins, our arteries, and our very brain substance. At the moment when each of us receives life and being, he is taken in charge by the genii elementals who preside over births, and who are classed beneath the astral powers superhuman astral spirits. Perpetually they change, not always identically, but revolving in circles. They permeate by the body two parts of the soul, that it may receive from each the impress of his own energy. But the reasonable part of the soul is not subject to the genii, it is designed for the reception of the God, who enlightens it with a sunny ray. Those who are thus illumined are few in number, and from them the genii abstain. For neither genii nor gods have any power in the presence of a single ray of God. But all other men, both soul and body, are directed by genii, to whom they cleave, and whose operations they effect. The genii have then the control of mundane things, and our bodies serve them as instruments. The above, save a few sectarian points, represents that which was a universal belief, common to all nations, till about a century or so back. It is still as orthodox in its broad outlines and features among pagans and Christians alike, if one accepts a handful of materialists and men of science. For whether one calls the genii of Hermes and his gods powers of darkness and angels, as in the Greek and Latin churches, or spirits of the dead as in spiritualism, or, again, butts and devas, shaitan or jinn, as they are still called in India and Muslim countries, they are all one and the same thing, illusion. Let not this, however, be misunderstood in the sense into which the great philosophical doctrine of the Vedantists has been lately perverted by Western schools. All that which is, emanates from the Absolute, which, by reason of this qualification alone, stands as the one and only reality. Hence, everything extraneous to this Absolute, the generative and causative element, must be an illusion, most undeniably. But this is only so from the purely metaphysical view. A man who regards himself as mentally sane, and is so regarded by his neighbors, calls the visions of an insane brother hallucinations, which make the victim either happy or supremely wretched, as the case may be, likewise illusions and fancies. But where is that madman for whom the hideous shadows in his deranged mind, his illusions, are not, for the time being, as actual and as real as the things which his physician or keeper may see? Everything is relative in this universe, everything is an illusion. But the experience of any plane is an actuality for the percipient being, whose consciousness is on that plane, though the said experience, regarded from the purely metaphysical standpoint, may be conceived to have no objective reality. But it is not against metaphysicians, but against physicists and materialists that esoteric teaching has to fight, and for these latter vital force, light, sound, electricity, even to the objectively drawing force of magnetism, have no objective being, and are said to exist merely as modes of motion, sensations and affections of matter. Neither the occultists generally, nor the theosophists, reject, as erroneously believed by some, the views and theories of the modern scientists, only because these views are opposed to theosophy. The first rule of our society is to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Theosophists, therefore, are the first to recognize the intrinsic value of science. But when its high priests resolve consciousness into a secretion from the gray matter of the brain, and everything else in nature into a mode of motion, we protest against a doctrine as being unphilosophical, self-contradictory, and simply absurd, from a scientific point of view, as much and even more than from the occult aspect of the esoteric knowledge. For truly the astral light of the derided Kabbalists has strange and weird secrets for him who can see in it, and the mysteries concealed within its incessantly disturbed waves are there, the whole body of materialists and scoffers notwithstanding. The astral light of the Kabbalists is by some very incorrectly translated ether. The latter is confused with the hypothetical ether of science, and both are referred to by some theosophists as synonymous with Akasha. This is a great mistake. The author of Irrational Refutation writes, thus unconsciously helping occultism. A characterization of Akasha will serve to show how inadequately it is represented by ether. In dimension it is infinite, it is not made up of parts, and color, taste, smell, and tangibility do not appertain to it. So far forth it corresponds exactly to time, space, Ishvara the Lord, but rather creative potency and soul anima mundi and soul. Its speciality, as compared therewith, consists in its being the material cause of sound. Except for its being so, one might take it to be one with vacuity. It is vacuity, no doubt, especially for rationalists. At any rate, Akasha is sure to produce vacuity in the brain of a materialist. Nevertheless, though Akasha is certainly not the ether of science, not even the ether of the occultist who defines the latter as one of the principles of Akasha only, it is as certainly, together with its primary, the cause of sound, a psychical and spiritual, not a material cause by any means. The relations of ether to Akasha may be defined by applying to both Akasha and ether the words used of the god in the Vedas, so himself was indeed his own son, one being the progeny of the other, and yet itself. This may be a difficult riddle to the profane, but very easy to understand for any Hindu even though not a mystic. These secrets of the astral light, along with many other mysteries, will remain non-existent to the materialists of our age, in the same way as America was a non-existent myth for Europeans during the early part of the medieval ages, whereas Scandinavians and Norwegians had actually reached and settled in that very old New World several centuries before. But, as a Columbus was born to rediscover and to force the old world to believe in antipodal countries, so will there be born scientists who will discover the marvels now claimed by occultists to exist in the regions of ether, with their varied and multiform denizens and conscious entities. Then, nolens volens, science will have to accept the old superstition as it has several others. And having been once forced to accept it, its learned professors in all probability, judging from past experience, as in the case of mesmerism and magnetism, now rebaptized hypnotism, will father the thing and reject the name. The choice of the new appellation will, in its turn, depend on the modes of motion, the new name for the older automatic physical processes among the nerve fibrils of the scientific brain of Molechet, and Also, most likely, upon the last meal of the namer, since, according to the founder of the new high-low idealistic scheme, cerebration is generically the same as jollification. Thus, were one to believe this preposterous proposition, the new name of the archaic truth would have to take its chance on the inspiration of the namer's liver, and then only would these truths have a chance of becoming scientific. But truth, however distasteful to the generally blind majority, has always had her champions ready to die for her. And it is not the occultists who will protest against its adoption by science under whatever new name. But until absolutely forced on the notice and acceptance of scientists, many an occult truth will be tabooed, as the phenomena of the spiritualists and other psychic manifestations were, to be finally appropriated by its extraducers without the least acknowledgement or thanks. Nitrogen has added considerably to chemical knowledge, but its discoverer, Paracelsus, is to this day called a quack. How profoundly true are the words of H.T. Buckle, in his admirable History of Civilization, when he says, "Owing to circumstances still unknown karmic provision, there appear from time to time great thinkers, who, devoting their lives to a single purpose, are able to anticipate the progress of mankind, and to produce a religion or a philosophy by which important effects are eventually brought about." But if we look into history, we shall clearly see that, although the origin of a new opinion may be thus due to a single man, the result which the new opinion produces will depend on the condition of the people among whom it is propagated. If either a religion or a philosophy is too much in advance of a nation, it can do no present service, but must bide its time until the minds of men are ripe for its reception. Every science, every creed has had its martyrs. According to the ordinary course of affairs, a few generations pass away, and then there comes a period when these very truths are looked upon as commonplace facts, and a little later there comes another period in which they are declared to be necessary, and even the dullest intellect wonders how they could ever have been denied. It is barely possible that the minds of the present generations are not quite ripe for the reception of occult truths. Such perchance will be the retrospect furnished to the advanced thinkers of the sixth root race of the history of the acceptance of esoteric philosophy fully and unconditionally. Meanwhile, the generations of our fifth race will continue to be led away by prejudice and preconceptions. Occult sciences will have the finger of scorn pointed at them from every street corner, and everyone will seek to ridicule and crush them in the name, and for the greater glory, of materialism and its so-called science. The present volumes, however, show, in an anticipatory answer to several of the forthcoming scientific objections, the true and mutual positions of the defendant and plaintiff. The theosophists and occultists stand arraigned by public opinion, which still holds high the banner of the inductive sciences. The latter have, then, to be examined, and it must be shown how far their achievements and discoveries in the realm of natural law are opposed, not so much to our claims, as to facts in nature. The hour has now struck to ascertain whether the walls of the modern Jericho are so impregnable that no blast of the occult trumpet is ever likely to make them crumble. The so-called forces with light and electricity heading them, and the constitution of the solar orb must be carefully examined, as also gravitation and the nebular theories. The natures of ether and of other elements must be discussed, thus contrasting scientific with occult teachings, while revealing some of the hitherto secret tenets of the latter. Some 15 years ago, the writer was the first to repeat, after the Kabbalists, The wise commandments in the Esoteric Catechism. Close thy mouth, lest thou shouldst speak of this the mystery, and thy heart, lest thou shouldst think aloud, and if thy heart has escaped thee, bring it back to its place, for such is the object of our alliance. And again, from the rules of initiation. This is a secret which gives death. Close thy mouth lest thou shouldst reveal it to the vulgar. Compress thy brain lest something should escape from it and fall outside. A few years later, a corner of the veil of Isis had to be lifted, and now another and a larger rent is made. But old and time-honored errors such as become with every day more glaring and self-evident stand arrayed in battle order now, as they did then. Marshaled by blind conservatism, conceit and prejudice, they are constantly on the watch, ready to strangle every truth, which, awakening from its age-long sleep, happens to knock for admission. Such has been the case ever since man became an animal. That this proves in every case moral death to the revealers who bring to light any of these old truths is as certain as that it gives life and regeneration to those who are fit to profit, even by the little that is now revealed to them. Symbolism and ideographs. Is not a symbol ever, to him who has eyes for it, some dimmer or clearer revelation of the godlike through all their glimmers something of a divine idea? Nay, the highest ensign that men ever met and embraced under, the cross itself, had no meaning, save an accidental extrinsic one. Carlyle. The study of the hidden meaning in every religious and profane legend, of whatsoever nation, large or small, and preeminently in the traditions of the East, has occupied the greater portion of the present writer's life. She is one of those who feel convinced that no mythological story, no traditional event in the folklore of a people, has ever, at any time, been pure fiction, but that every one of such narratives has an actual historical lining to it. In this the writer disagrees with those symbologists, however great their reputation, who find in every myth nothing more than additional proof of the superstitious bent of mind of the ancients, and who believe that all mythologies sprang from, and are built upon, solar myths. Such superficial thinkers have been admirably disposed of by Mr. Gerald Massey, the poet and Egyptologist, in a lecture on lunulatry, ancient and modern. His pointed criticism is worthy of reproduction in this part of our work, as it echoes so well our own feelings, expressed openly so far back as 1875, when Isis Unveiled was written. For 30 years past, Professor Max Muller has been teaching in his books and lectures, in the Times, Saturday Review, and various magazines, from the platform of the Royal Institution, the pulpit of Westminster Abbey, and his chair at Oxford, that mythology is a disease of language, and that the ancient symbolism was a result of something like a primitive mental aberration. We know, says Renouf, echoing Max Muller, in his Hibbert lectures, we know that mythology is the disease which springs up at a peculiar stage of human culture. Such is the shallow explanation of the non-evolutionists, and such explanations are still accepted by the British public, that gets its thinking done for it by proxy. Professor Max Muller, Cox, Gubernatus, and other propounders of the solar mythos have portrayed the primitive myth maker for us as a sort of Germanized Hindu metaphysician, projecting his own shadow on a mental mist, and talking ingeniously concerning smoke, or, at least, cloud, the sky overhead becoming like the dome of dreamland, scribbled over with the imagery of aboriginal nightmares. They conceive the early man in their own likeness, and look upon him as perversely prone to self-mystification, or, as Fontenelle has it, subject to beholding things that are not there. They have misrepresented primitive or archaic man as having been idiotically misled from the first by an active but untutored imagination into believing all sorts of fallacies, which were directly and constantly contradicted by his own daily experience, a fool of fancy in the midst of those grim realities that were grinding his experiences into him, like the grinding icebergs making their imprints upon the rocks submerged beneath the sea. It remains to be said, and will one day be acknowledged, that these accepted teachers have been no nearer to the beginnings of mythology and language than Burns' poet Willie had been near to Pegasus. My reply is, 'tis but a dream of the metaphysical theorist that mythology was a disease of language, or of anything else except his own brain. The origin and meaning of mythology have been missed altogether by these Solarites and weathermongers. Mythology was a primitive mode of thinking, the early thought. It was founded on natural facts and is still verifiable in phenomena. There is nothing insane, nothing irrational in it, when considered in the light of evolution, and when its mode of expression by sign language is thoroughly understood. The insanity lies in mistaking it for human history or divine revelation. Mythology is the repository of man's most ancient science, and what concerns us chiefly is this: when truly interpreted once more, it is destined to be the death of those false theologies to which it has unwittingly given birth. In modern phraseology, a statement is sometimes said to be mythical in proportion to its being untrue, but the ancient mythology was not a system or mode of falsifying in that sense. Its fables were the means of conveying facts. They were neither forgeries nor fictions. For example, when the Egyptians portrayed the moon as a cat, they were not ignorant enough to suppose that the moon was a cat, nor did their wandering fancies see any likeness in the moon to a cat, nor was a cat myth any mere expansion of verbal metaphor, nor had they any intention of making puzzles or riddles. They had observed the simple fact that the cat saw in the dark, and that her eyes became full-orbed and grew most luminous by night. The moon was the seer by night in heaven, and the cat was its equivalent on the earth, and so the familiar cat was adopted as a representative, a natural sign, a living pictograph of the lunar orb. And so it followed that the sun, which saw down in the underworld at night, could also be called the cat, as it was, because it also saw in the dark. The name of the cat in Egyptian is Mao, which denotes the seer, from Mao, to see. One writer on mythology asserts that the Egyptians imagined a great cat behind the sun, which is the pupil of the cat's eye. But this imagining is all modern. It is the Mullerite stock in trade. The moon, as cat, was the eye of the sun, because it reflected the solar light, and because the eye gives back the image in its mirror. In the form of the goddess Pasht, the cat keeps watch for the sun, with her paw holding down and bruising the head of the serpent of darkness, called his eternal enemy. This is a very correct exposition of the lunar mythos from its astronomical aspect. Selenography, however, is the least esoteric of the divisions of lunar symbology. To master thoroughly, if one is permitted to coin a new word, selenognosis, one must become proficient in more than its astronomical meaning. The moon is intimately related to the earth, as shown in the stanzas, and is more directly concerned with all the mysteries of our globe than is even Venus Lucifer, the occult sister and alter ego of the earth. The untiring researches of Western, especially German, symbologists during the last and the present centuries have induced the most unprejudiced students and of course every occultist, to see that without the help of symbology with its 7 departments, of which the moderns know nothing, no ancient scripture can ever be correctly understood. Symbology must be studied from every one of its aspects, for each nation had its own peculiar methods of expression. In short, no Egyptian papyrus, no Indian Allah, no Assyrian tile, no Hebrew scroll should be read and interpreted literally. This every scholar now knows. The able lectures of Mr. Gerald Massey alone are sufficient to convince any fair-minded Christian that to accept the dead letter of the Bible is equivalent to falling into a grosser error and superstition than any hitherto evolved by the brain of the savage South Sea Islander. But the fact to which even the most truth-loving and truth-searching Orientalists, whether Aryanists or Egyptologists, seem to remain blind is that every symbol on papyrus or Allah is a many-faced diamond, each of whose facets not only includes several interpretations, but also relates to several sciences. This is instanced in the just quoted interpretation of the cat, symbolizing the moon, an example of sidereal-terrestrial imagery, for the moon has with other nations many other meanings besides. As a learned Mason and Theosophist, the late Kenneth Mackenzie has shown in his Royal Masonic Cyclopedia, there is a great difference between emblem and symbol. The former comprises a larger series of thoughts than a symbol, which may be said rather to illustrate some single special idea. Hence, the symbols lunar or solar, for example, of several countries, each illustrating such a special idea or series of ideas, form collectively an esoteric emblem. The latter is a concrete visible picture or sign representing principles, or a series of principles, recognizable by those who have received certain instructions, initiates. To put it still plainer, an emblem is usually a series of graphic pictures viewed and explained allegorically, and unfolding an idea in panoramic views, one after the other. Thus the Puranas are written emblems. So are the Mosaic and Christian Testaments, or the Bible, and all other exoteric scriptures. As the same authority shows, all esoteric societies have made use of emblems and symbols, such as the Pythagorean Society, the Eleusinians, the Hermetic Brethren of Egypt, the Rosicrucians, and the Freemasons. Many of these emblems it is not proper to divulge to the general eye, and a very minute difference may make the emblem or symbol differ widely in its meaning. The magical sigilla, being founded on certain principles of number, partake of this character, and although monstrous or ridiculous in the eyes of the uninstructed, convey a whole body of doctrine to those who have been trained to recognize them. The above enumerated societies are all comparatively modern, none dating back earlier than the Middle Ages. How much more proper, then, that the students of the oldest archaic school should be careful not to divulge secrets of far more importance to humanity, as being dangerous in ignorant hands, than any of the so-called Masonic secrets, which have now become those of Polichinelle, as the French say. But this restriction can apply only to the psychological or rather psychophysiological and cosmical significance of symbol and emblem. And even to that only partially. For though an adept is compelled to refuse to impart the conditions and means that lead to any correlation of elements whether psychic or physical which may produce harmful as well as beneficent results, yet he is ever ready to impart to the earnest student the secret of the ancient thought in anything that has respect to history concealed under mythological symbolism. And thus to furnish a few more landmarks for a retrospective view of the past, insofar as it furnishes useful information with regard to the origin of man, the evolution of the races in Geonosis. And yet it is the crying complaint today, not only among theosophists, but also among the few profane interested in the subject. Why do not the adepts reveal that which they know? To this, one might answer, why should they, since one knows beforehand that no man of science will accept it, even as a hypothesis, much less as a theory or axiom? Have you so much as accepted or believed in the ABC of the occult philosophy, contained in the Theosophist, Esoteric Buddhism, and other works and periodicals? Has not even the little which has been given, been ridiculed and derided, and made to face the animal and ape theory of Huxley and Haeckel, on the one hand, and the rib of Adam and the apple on the other? Notwithstanding such an unenviable prospect, however, a mass of facts is given in the present work, and the origin of man, the evolution of the globe and the races, human and animal, are as fully treated as the writer is able to treat them. The proofs brought forward in corroboration of the old teachings are scattered widely throughout the old scriptures of ancient civilizations. The Puranas, the Zend-Avesta, and the old classics are full of such facts, but no one has ever taken the trouble of collecting and collating them together. The reason for this is that all such events were recorded symbolically, and that the best scholars, the most acute minds, among Orarianists and Egyptologists, have been too often darkened by one or another preconception, and still oftener, by one-sided views of the secret meaning. Yet even a parable is a spoken symbol. A fiction or a fable, as some think, an allegorical representation, we say, of life realities, events, and facts. And just as a moral was ever drawn from a parable, such moral being an actual truth and fact in human life, so a historical, real event was deduced, by those versed in the hieratic sciences, from emblems and symbols recorded in the ancient archives of the temples. The religious and esoteric history of every nation was embedded in symbols, it was never expressed literally in so many words. All the thoughts and emotions, all the learning and knowledge, revealed and acquired, of the early races, found their pictorial expression in allegory and parable. Why? Because the spoken word has a potency not only unknown to, but even unsuspected and naturally disbelieved in, by the modern sages. Because sound and rhythm are closely related to the four elements of the ancients, and because such or another vibration in the air is sure to awaken the corresponding powers, union with which produces good or bad results, as the case may be. No student was ever allowed to recite historical, religious, or real events of any kind, in so many unmistakable words, lest the powers connected with the event should be once more attracted. Such events were narrated only during initiation, and every student had to record them in corresponding symbols, drawn out of his own mind and examined later by his master, before they were finally accepted. Thus by degrees was the Chinese alphabet created, as just before it the hieratic symbols were fixed upon in Old Egypt. In the Chinese language, the characters of which may be read in any language, and which, as just said, is only a little less ancient than the Egyptian alphabet of Thoth, every word has its corresponding symbol in a pictorial form. This language possesses many thousands of such symbol letters or logograms, each conveying the meaning of a whole word, for letters proper, or an alphabet as we understand it, do not exist in the Chinese language any more than they did in the Egyptian, till a far later period. Thus a Japanese who does not understand one word of Chinese, meeting with a Chinaman who has never heard the language of the former, will communicate in writing with him, and they will understand each other perfectly because their writing is symbolical. The explanation of the chief symbols and emblems is now attempted, as Book 2, which treats of anthropogenesis, would be most difficult to understand without a preparatory acquaintance with at least the metaphysical symbols. Nor would it be just to enter upon an esoteric reading of symbolism without giving due honor to one who has rendered it the greatest service in this century by discovering the chief key to ancient Hebrew symbology, strongly interwoven with metrology, one of the keys to the once universal mystery language. Mr. Ralston Skinner, of Cincinnati, the author of The Key to the Hebrew-Egyptian Mystery and the Source of Measures, has our thanks. A mystic and a Kabbalist by nature, he has labored for many years in this direction, and his efforts have certainly been crowned with great success. In his own words, the writer is quite certain that there was an ancient language which modernly and up to this time appears to have been lost, the vestiges of which, however, abundantly exist. The author discovered that this geometrical ratio, the integral ratio of the diameter to the circumference of a circle, was the very ancient and probably the divine origin of linear measures. It appears almost proven that the same system of geometry, numbers, ratio, and measures was known and made use of on the continent of North America, even prior to the knowledge of the same by the descending Semites. The peculiarity of this language was that it could be contained in another, concealed and not to be perceived, save through the help of special instruction, letters and syllabic signs possessing at the same time the powers or meanings of numbers, of geometrical shapes, pictures, or ideographs and symbols. The design scope of which would be determinatively helped out by parables in the shape of narratives or parts of narratives, while also it could be set forth separately, independently, and variously, by pictures, in stone work, or in earth constructions. To clear up an ambiguity as to the term language, primarily the word means the expression of ideas by human speech, but, secondarily, it may mean the expression of ideas by any other instrumentality. This old language is so compassed in the Hebrew text that by the use of the written characters, which uttered shall be the language first defined, a distinctly separated series of ideas may be intentionally communicated, other than those ideas expressed by the reading of the sound signs. This secondary language sets forth, under a veil, series of ideas, copies in imagination of things sensible, which may be pictured, and of things which may be classed as real without being sensible. As, for instance, the number 9 may be taken as a reality, though it has no sensible existence, so also a revolution of the moon, as separated from the moon itself by which that revolution has been made, may be taken as giving rise to, or causing a real idea, though such a revolution has no substance. This ideal language may consist of symbols restricted to arbitrary terms and signs, having a very limited range of conceptions, and quite valueless, or it may be a reading of nature and some of her manifestations of a value almost immeasurable, as regards human civilization. A picture of something natural may give rise to ideas of coordinating subjects, radiating out in various and even opposing directions, like the spokes of a wheel, and producing natural realities in departments very foreign to the apparent tendency of the reading of the first or starting picture. Notion may give rise to connected notion, but if it does, then, however apparently incongruous, All resulting ideas must spring from the original picture and be harmonically connected or related the one with the other. Thus, with a pictured idea radical enough, the imagination of the cosmos itself, even in its details of construction, might result. Such a use of ordinary language is now obsolete, but it has become a question with the writer whether at one time, far back in the past, it, or such, was not the language of the world and of universal use, possessed, however, as it became more and more molded into its arcane forms by a select class or caste. By this I mean that the popular tongue or vernacular commenced even in its origin to be made use of as the vehicle of this peculiar mode of conveying ideas. Of this the evidences are very strong, and, indeed, it would seem that in the history of the human race there happened, from causes which at present, at any rate, we cannot trace, a lapse or loss from an original perfect language and a perfect system of science. Shall we say perfect because they were of divine origin and impartation? Divine origin does not here mean a revelation from an anthropomorphic God on a mount amidst thunder and lightning, but, as we understand it, a language and a system of science imparted to early mankind by a more advanced mankind, so much higher as to be divine in the sight of that infant humanity. By a mankind, in short, from other spheres, an idea which contains nothing supernatural in it, but the acceptance or rejection of which depends upon the degree of conceit and arrogance in the mind of him to whom it is stated. For, if the professors of modern knowledge would only confess that, though they know nothing of the future of the disembodied man, or rather will accept nothing, yet this future may be pregnant with surprises and unexpected revelations to them, once their egos are rid of their gross bodies, then materialistic unbelief would have fewer chances than it has. Who of them knows, or can tell, what may happen when once the life cycle of this globe is run down, and our Mother Earth herself falls into her last sleep? Who is bold enough to say that the divine egos of our mankind, at least the elect out of the multitudes passing on to other spheres, will not become in their turn the divine instructors of a new mankind generated by them on a new globe, called to life and activity by the disembodied principles of our earth? All this may have been the experience of the past, and these strange records lie embedded in the mystery language of the prehistoric ages, the language now called symbolism. The mystery language and its keys. Recent discoveries made by great mathematicians and Kabbalists thus prove, beyond a shadow of doubt, that every theology, from the earliest down to the latest, has sprung not only from a common source of abstract beliefs, but from one universal esoteric, or mystery, language. These scholars hold the key to the universal language of old, and have turned it successfully, though only once, in the hermetically closed door leading to the Hall of Mysteries. The great archaic system known from prehistoric ages as the sacred wisdom science, one that is contained and can be traced in every old as well as in every new religion, had, and still has, its universal language suspected by the Mason Reagan, the language of the Hierophants, which has 7 dialects, so to speak, each referring, and being specially appropriate, to one of the 7 mysteries of nature. Each had its own symbolism. Nature could thus be either read in its fullness, or viewed from one of its special aspects. The proof of this lies, to this day, in the extreme difficulty which the Orientalists in general, and the Indianists and Egyptologists in particular, experience in interpreting the allegorical writings of the Aryans and the hieratic records of Old Egypt. This is because they will never remember that all the ancient records were written in a language which was universal and known to all nations alike in days of old, but which is now intelligible only to the few. Like the Arabic figures which are understandable to men of every nation, or like the English word and, which becomes et for the Frenchman, un for the German, and so on, yet which may be expressed for all civilized nations in the simple sign and so all the words of that mystery language signified the same thing to each man, of whatever nationality. There have been several men of note who have tried to re-establish such a universal and philosophical tongue, Delgarme, Wilkins, Leibniz, but Demonue, in his Pasigraphy, is the only one who has proven its possibility. The scheme of Valentinius, called the Greek Kabbalah based on the combination of Greek letters, might serve as a model. The many-sided facets of the mystery language have led to the adoption of widely varied dogmas and rites in the exotericism of the church rituals. It is these, again, which are at the origin of most of the dogmas of the Christian Church, for instance, the 7 sacraments, the Trinity, the resurrection, the 7 capital sins and the 7 virtues. The 7 keys to the mystery tongue, however, having always been in the keeping of the highest among the initiated hierophants of antiquity, it is only the partial use of a few out of the 7 which passed, through the treason of some early church fathers ex-initiates of the temples into the hands of the new sect of the Nazarenes. Some of the early popes were initiates, but the last fragments of their knowledge have now fallen into the power of the Jesuits, who have turned them into a system of sorcery. It is maintained that India, not confined to its present limits, but including its ancient boundaries, is the only country in the world which still has among her sons adepts who have the knowledge of all the 7 subsystems and the key to the entire system. From the fall of Memphis, Egypt began to lose these keys one by one, and Chaldea had preserved only 3 in the days of Beresus. As for the Hebrews, in all their writings they show no more than a thorough knowledge of the astronomical, geometrical and numerical systems of symbolizing the human, and especially the physiological functions. They never had the higher keys. M. Gaston Maspero, the great French Egyptologist and the successor of Mariette Bey, writes, "Every time I hear people talking of the religion of Egypt, I am tempted to ask which of the Egyptian religions they are talking about. Is it of the Egyptian religion of the 4th dynasty, or of the Egyptian religion of the Ptolemaic period? Is it of the religion of the rabble, or of that of the learned? Of the religion such as was taught in the schools of Heliopolis, or of that which was in the minds and conceptions of the Theban sacerdotal class?" 4. Between the first Memphite tomb, which bears the cartouche of a king of the 3rd dynasty, and the last stones engraved at Esna under Caesar Philippus, the Arabian, there is an interval of at least 5,000 years. Leaving aside the invasion of the shepherds, the Ethiopian and Assyrian dominions, the Persian conquest, Greek colonization, and the 1,000 revolutions of its political life, Egypt had passed during those 5,000 years through many vicissitudes of life, moral and intellectual. Chapter 17 of the Book of the Dead, which seems to contain the exposition of the system of the world, as it was understood at Heliopolis during the time of the first dynasties, is known to us by a few copies of the 11th and 12th dynasties. Every one of the verses compassing it was already interpreted in 3 or 4 different ways, so different, indeed, that according to this or another school, the demiurge became either the solar fire Rashu or the primordial water. 15 centuries later, The number of readings had increased considerably. Time, in its course, had modified their ideas about the universe and the forces that ruled it. In the short 18 centuries that Christianity has existed, it has worked up, developed and transformed most of its dogmas. How many times, then, might not the Egyptian priesthood have altered their dogmas during those 50 centuries that separate Theodosius from the king builders of the pyramids? Here we believe the eminent Egyptologist is going too far. The exoteric dogmas may often have been altered, the esoteric never. He does not take into account the sacred immutability of the primitive truths, revealed only during the mysteries of initiation. The Egyptian priests had forgotten much, they altered nothing. The loss of a great part of the primitive teaching was due to the sudden deaths of the great hierophants, who passed away before they had time to reveal all to their successors, mostly in the absence of worthy heirs to the knowledge. Yet they have preserved in their rituals and dogmas the principal teachings of the secret doctrine. Thus, in the chapter of the Book of the Dead, mentioned by Maspero, we find 1. Osiris saying he is tuned the creative force in nature, giving form to all beings, spirits and men, self-generated and self-existent issued from Nun, the celestial river, called Father-Mother of the gods, the primordial deity, which is chaos or the deep, impregnated by the unseen spirit. 2. He has found Shu, the solar force, on the stairway in the city of the eight, the two squares of good and evil, and he has annihilated the children of rebellion, the evil principles in Nun, chaos. 3. He is the fire and water, Nun the primordial parent, and he created the gods out of his limbs 14 gods, twice 7, 7 dark and 7 light gods, the 7 spirits of the presence of the Christians, and the 7 dark evil spirits. 4. He is the law of existence and being, the Benu, or phoenix, the bird of resurrection and eternity, in whom night follows day, and day-night an allusion to the periodical cycles of cosmic resurrection and human reincarnation. For what else can this mean? The wayfarer who crosses millions of years is the name of one, and the great green primordial water or chaos, the name of the other one begetting millions of years in succession, the other engulfing them, to restore them back. 5. He speaks of the 7 luminous ones who follow their lord, Osiris, who confers justice, in Amenti. All this is now shown to have been the source and origin of Christian dogmas. That which the Jews had from Egypt, through Moses and other initiates, was confused and distorted enough in later days, but that which the Church got from both is still more misinterpreted. Yet the system of the former, in this special department of symbology the key, namely, to the mysteries of astronomy is connected with those of generation and conception is now proven identical with those ideas in ancient religions, which have developed the phallic element of theology. The Jewish system of sacred measures, applied to religious symbols, is the same, so far as geometrical and numerical combinations go, as those of Greece, Chaldea and Egypt, for it was adopted by the Israelites during the centuries of their slavery and captivity among the two latter nations. What was this system? It is the intimate conviction of the author of the source of measures that the Mosaic books were intended, by a mode of art speech, to set forth a geometrical and numerical system of exact science, which should serve as an origin of measures. Piazzi Smith believes similarly. This system and these measures are found by some scholars to be identical with those used in the construction of the Great Pyramid. But this is only partially so. The foundation of these measures was the Parker ratio, says Ralston Skinner, in The Source of Measures. The author of this very extraordinary work has discovered it, he says, in the use of the integral ratio of the diameter to the circumference of a circle, discovered by John A. Parker, of New York. This ratio is 6561 for diameter and 20,612 for circumference. Furthermore, that this geometrical ratio was the very ancient and probably the divine origin of what have now become, through exoteric handling and practical application, the British linear measures, the underlying unit of which, viz. The inch, was likewise the base of one of the royal Egyptian cubits and of the Roman foot. He also discovered that there was a modified form of the ratio, viz. 113 to 355, and that while this last ratio pointed through its origin to the exact integral pi, or to 6561 to 20,612, it also served as a base for astronomical calculations. The author discovered that a system of exact science, geometrical, numerical, and astronomical, founded on these ratios, and to be seen in use in the construction of the great Egyptian pyramid, was in part the burden of this language, as contained in, and concealed under, the verbiage of the Hebrew text of the Bible. The inch and the 2-foot rule of 24 inches, interpreted for use through the elements of the circle and the ratios mentioned, were found to be at the basis or foundation of this natural, and Egyptian, and Hebrew system of science, while, moreover, it seems evident enough that the system itself was looked upon as of divine origin, and of divine revelation. But let us see what is said by the opponents of Prof. Piazzi Smith's measurements of the pyramid. Mr. Petrie seems to deny them, and to have made short work altogether of Piazzi Smith's calculations in their biblical connection. So does Mr. Proctor, the champion coincidentalist for many years past in every question of ancient arts and sciences. Speaking of the multitude of relations independent of the pyramid, which have turned up while the pyramidalists have been endeavoring to connect the pyramid with the solar system, he says, these coincidences which would still remain if the pyramid had no existence are altogether more curious than any coincidence between the pyramid and astronomical numbers. The former are as close and remarkable as they are real. The latter, which are only imaginary, have only been established by the process which schoolboys call fudging, and now new measures have left the work to be done all over again. On this Mr. C. Stonyland-Wake justly observes, they must, however, have been more than mere coincidences, if the builders of the pyramid had the astronomical knowledge displayed in its perfect orientation, and in its other admitted astronomical features. They had it assuredly, and it is on this knowledge that the program of the mysteries and of the series of initiations was based. Hence, the construction of the pyramid, the everlasting record and the indestructible symbol of these mysteries and initiations on earth, as the courses of the stars are in heaven. The cycle of initiation was a reproduction in miniature of that great series of cosmic changes to which astronomers have given the name of the tropical or sidereal year. Just as, at the close of the cycle of the sidereal year, 25,868 years, the heavenly bodies return to the same relative positions as they occupied at its outset, so at the close of the cycle of initiation, the inner man has regained the pristine state of divine purity and knowledge, from which he set out on his cycle of terrestrial incarnation. Moses, an initiate into the Egyptian mystagogy, based the religious mysteries of the new nation which he created upon the same abstract formulae derived from this sidereal cycle, symbolized by the form and measurements of the tabernacle, which he is supposed to have constructed in the wilderness. On these data, the later Jewish high priests constructed the allegory of Solomon's temple, a building which never had a real existence, any more than had King Solomon himself, who is as much a solar myth as is the still later Hiram Abiff of the Masons, as Reagan has well demonstrated. Thus, if the measurements of this allegorical temple, the symbol of the cycle of initiation, coincide with those of the Great Pyramid, it is due to the fact that the former were derived from the latter through the tabernacle of Moses. That our author has undeniably discovered one and even two of the keys is fully demonstrated in the work just quoted. One has only to read it to feel a growing conviction that the hidden meaning of the allegories and parables of both testaments is now unveiled. But that he owes this discovery far more to his own genius than to Parker and Piazzi Smith is also as certain, if not more so. For, as just shown, it is not so certain whether the measures of the Great Pyramid adopted by the biblical parametalists are beyond suspicion. A proof of this is to be found in the work called The Pyramids and Temples of Giza by Mr. F. Petrie, and also in other works written quite recently to oppose the said calculations, which their authors call biased. We gather that nearly every one of Piazzi Smith's measurements differs from the later and more carefully made measurements of Mr. Petrie, who concludes the introduction to his work with this sentence. As to the results of the whole investigation, perhaps many theorists will agree with an American who was a warm believer in pyramid theories when he came to Giza. I had the pleasure of his company there for a couple of days, and at our last meal together he said to me in a saddened way, "Well, sir, I feel as if I had been to a funeral. By all means let the old theories have a decent burial, though we should take care that in our haste, none of the wounded ones are buried alive." As regards the late J.A. Parker's calculation in general, and his third proposition especially, we have consulted some eminent mathematicians, and this is the substance of what they say. Parker's reasoning rests on sentimental, rather than on mathematical, considerations, and is logically inconclusive. Proposition 3, namely, that the circle is the natural basis or beginning of all area, and the square being made so in mathematical science is artificial and arbitrary, is an illustration of an arbitrary proposition, and cannot safely be relied upon in mathematical reasoning. The same observation applies, even more strongly, to Proposition 7, which states that because the circle is the primary shape in nature, and hence the basis of area, and because the circle is measured by, and is equal to the square only in ratio of half its circumference by the radius, therefore, circumference and radius, and not the square of diameter, are the only natural and legitimate elements of area, by which all regular shapes are made equal to the square, and equal to the circle. Proposition 9 is a remarkable example of faulty reasoning, though it is the one on which Mr. Parker's quadrature mainly rests. It states that the circle and the equilateral triangle are opposite to one another in all the elements of their construction, and hence the fractional diameter of one circle, which is equal to the diameter of one square, is in the opposite duplicate ratio to the diameter of an equilateral triangle whose area is 1. Granting, for the sake of argument, that a triangle can be said to have a radius, in the sense in which we speak of the radius of a circle for what Parker calls the radius of the triangle, is the radius of a circle inscribed in a triangle, and therefore not the radius of the triangle at all, and granting for the moment the other fanciful and mathematical propositions united in his premises, why must we conclude that if the equilateral triangle and circle are opposite in all the elements of their construction, the diameter of any defined circle is in the opposite duplicate ratio of the diameter of any given equivalent triangle? What necessary connection is there between the premises and the conclusion? The reasoning is of a kind not known in geometry and would not be accepted by strict mathematicians. Whether the archaic esoteric system originated the British inch or not is of little consequence, however, to the strict and true metaphysician. Nor does Mr. Ralston Skinner's esoteric reading of the Bible become incorrect merely because the measurements of the pyramid may not be found to agree with those of Solomon's Temple, the Ark of Noah, etc., or because Mr. Parker's quadrature of the circle is rejected by mathematicians. For Mr. Skinner's reading depends primarily on the Kabbalistic methods and the rabbinical value of the Hebrew letters. But it is extremely important to ascertain whether the measures used in the evolution of the symbolic religion of the Aryans, in the construction of their temples, in the figures given in the Puranas, and especially in their chronology, their astronomical symbols, the duration of the cycles, and other computations, were, or were not, the same as those used in the biblical measurements and glyphs. For this will prove that the Jews, unless they took their sacred cubit and measurements from the Egyptians, Moses being an initiate of their priests must have got those notions from India. At any rate, they passed them on to the early Christians. Hence, it is the occultists and Kabbalists who are the true heirs to the knowledge, or the secret wisdom, which is still found in the Bible, for they alone now understand its real meaning, whereas profane Jews and Christians cling to the husks and dead letter thereof. That it was this system of measures which led to the invention of the god names Elohim and Jehovah, and to their adaptation to phallicism, and that Jehovah is a not very flattering copy of Osiris, is now demonstrated by the author of The Source of Measures. But the latter and Mr. Piazzi Smith both seem to labor under the impression that a. the priority of the system belongs to the Israelites, the Hebrew language being the divine language, and that b. this universal language belongs to direct revelation. The latter hypothesis is correct only in the sense shown in the last paragraph of the preceding section, but we have yet to agree as to the nature and character of the divine revealer. The former hypothesis as to priority will for the profane, of course, depend on a. the internal and external evidence of the revelation, and b. on each scholar's individual preconceptions. This, however, cannot prevent either the theistic Kabbalist or the pantheistic occultist from believing each in his way, neither of the two convincing the other. The data furnished by history are too meager and unsatisfactory for either of them to prove to the skeptic which of them is right. On the other hand, the proofs afforded by tradition are too constantly rejected for us to hope to settle the question in our present age. Meanwhile, materialistic science will be laughing at both Kabbalists and occultists indifferently. But the vexed question of priority once laid aside, science, in its departments of philology and comparative religion, will find itself finally taken to task and be compelled to admit the common claim. One by one the claims become admitted, as one scientist after another is compelled to recognize the facts given out from the secret doctrine, though he rarely, if ever, recognizes that he has been anticipated in his statements. Thus, In the palmy days of Mr. Piazzi Smith's authority on the Pyramid of Gizeh, his theory was that the porphyry sarcophagus of the King's Chamber was the unit of measure for the two most enlightened nations of the earth, England and America, and was no better than a corn bin. This was vehemently denied by us in Isis Unveiled, which had just been published at that time. Then the New York press arose in arms, the Sun and the World newspapers chiefly, against our presuming to correct or find fault with such a star of learning. In that work, we had said that Herodotus, when treating of that pyramid, might have added that, externally, it symbolized the creative principle of nature and illustrated also the principles of geometry, mathematics, astrology, and astronomy. Internally, it was a majestic fane, in whose somber recesses were performed the mysteries, and whose walls had often witnessed the initiation scenes of members of the royal family. The porphyry sarcophagus, which Professor Piazzi Smith, Astronomer Royal of Scotland, degrades into a corn bin, was the baptismal font, upon emerging from which the neophyte was born again and became an adept. Our statement was laughed at in those days. We were accused of having got our ideas from the craze of Shaw, an English writer who had maintained that the sarcophagus had been used for the celebration of the mysteries of Osiris, although we had never heard of that writer. And now, 6 or 7 years later, 1882, this is what Mr. Stonyland Wake writes. The so-called King's Chamber, of which an enthusiastic pyramidist says, the polished walls, fine materials, grand proportions, and exalted place, eloquently tell of glories yet to come, if not the chamber of perfections of Cheops' tomb, was probably the place to which the initiate was admitted, after he had passed through the narrow upward passage and the grand gallery, with its lowly termination, which gradually prepared him for the final stage of the sacred mysteries. Had Mr. Stonyland Wake been a theosophist, he might have added that the narrow upward passage leading to the King's Chamber had a narrow gate indeed, the same strait gate which leadeth unto life or the new spiritual rebirth, alluded to by Jesus in Matthew, and that it was of this gate in the initiation temple that the writer, who recorded the words alleged to have been spoken by an initiate, was thinking. Thus the greatest scholars of science, instead of pooh-poohing that supposed farrago of absurd fiction and superstitions as the Brahmanical literature is generally termed, will endeavor to learn the symbolical universal language, with its numerical and geometrical keys. But here, again, they will hardly be successful if they share the belief that the Jewish Kabbalistic system contains the key to the whole mystery, for it does not. Nor does any other scripture at present possess it in its entirety, since even the Vedas are not complete. Every old religion is but a chapter or two of the entire volume of archaic primeval mysteries, Eastern occultism alone being able to boast that it is in possession of the full secret, with its 7 keys. Comparisons will be instituted, and as much as possible will be explained in this work. The rest is left to the student's personal intuition. In saying that Eastern occultism has the secret, it is not as if a complete or even an approximate knowledge was claimed by the writer, which would be absurd. What I know, I give out; that which I cannot explain, the student must find out for himself. But though we may suppose that the entire cycle of the universal mystery language will not be mastered for centuries to come, yet even the little which has hitherto been discovered in the Bible by some scholars is quite sufficient to demonstrate the claim mathematically. As Judaism availed itself of 2 keys out of the 7, And as these two keys have now been rediscovered, it becomes no longer a matter of individual speculation and hypothesis, least of all of coincidence, but one of a correct reading of the biblical texts, just as anyone acquainted with arithmetic reads and verifies an addition sum. In fact, all we have said and Isis unveiled is now found corroborated in the Egyptian mystery, or the source of measures, by such readings of the Bible with the numerical and geometrical keys. A few years longer, and this system will kill the dead letter reading of the Bible, as it will that of all the other exoteric faiths, by showing the dogmas in their real, naked meaning. And then this undeniable meaning, however incomplete, will unveil the mystery of being, and will, moreover, entirely change the modern scientific systems of anthropology, ethnology and especially that of chronology. The element of phallicism, found in every god name and narrative in the Old, and to some degree in the New Testament, may also in time considerably change modern materialistic views on biology and physiology. Divested of their modern repulsive crudeness, such views of nature and man will, on the authority of the celestial bodies and their mysteries, unveil the evolutions of the human mind and show how natural was such a course of thought. The so-called phallic symbols have become offensive only because of the element of materiality and animality in them. In the beginning, such symbols were but natural, as they originated with the archaic races, which, issuing to their personal knowledge from an androgyne ancestry, were the first phenomenal manifestations in their own side of the separation of the sexes and the ensuing mystery of creating in their turn. If later races, especially the chosen people, have degraded them, this does not affect the origin of the symbols. This little Semitic tribe, one of the smallest branchlets from the commingling of the fourth and fifth sub-races, the Mongolo-Turanian and the so-called Indo-European, after the sinking of the great continent could only accept its symbology in the spirit which was given to it by the nations from which it was derived. And, perchance, in the Mosaic beginnings, the symbology was not so crude as it became later under the handling of Ezra, who remodeled the whole Pentateuch. To take an instance, the glyph of Pharaoh's daughter, the woman, the Nile, the great deep and water, and the baby boy found floating therein in the Ark of Rushes, was not primarily compassed for, or by Moses. It was anticipated in the fragments found on the Babylonian tiles, in the story of King Sargon, who lived far earlier than Moses. In his Assyrian Antiquities, Mr. George Smith says, "In the palace of Sennacherib at Kuyunjik, I found another fragment of the curious history of Sargon published in my translation in the Transactions of the Society of Biblical Archaeology. The capital of Sargon the Babylonian Moses was the great city of Agadi, called by the Semites Akkad, mentioned in Genesis as the capital of Nimrod. Akkad lay near the city of Sippara on the Euphrates and north of Babylon." Another strange coincidence is found in the fact that the name of the neighboring city of Sippara is the same as the name of the wife of Moses, Zipporah. Of course, this story is a clever addition by Ezra, who could not have been ignorant of the original. This curious story is found on fragments of tablets from Kuyunjik and reads as follows. 1. Sargina, the powerful king, the king of Akkad. 2. My mother was a princess, my father I did not know, a brother of my father ruled over the country. 3. In the city of Azuparanu, which by the side of the river Euphrates is situated. 4. My mother, the princess, conceived me, in difficulty she brought me forth. 5. She placed me in an ark of rushes, with bitumen my exit she sealed up. 6. She launched me in the river, which did not drown me. 7. The river carried me to Aki, the water carrier, it brought me. 8. Aki, the water carrier, in tenderness of bowels, lifted me. And now let us compare the Bible narrative in Exodus. And when she Moses' mother could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. Mr. G. Smith then continues. The story is supposed to have happened about 1600 BC, rather earlier than the supposed age of Moses, and, as we know that the fame of Sargon reached Egypt, it is quite likely that this account had a connection with the events related in Exodus 2, for every action, when once performed, has a tendency to be repeated. But now that Professor Sayce has had the courage to push back the dates of the Chaldean and Assyrian kings by 2,000 years more, Sargon must have preceded Moses by 2,000 years at the least. The confession is suggestive, but the figures lack a cipher or two. Now, what is the logical inference? Most assuredly, that which gives us the right to say that the story told of Moses by Ezra had been learned by him while at Babylon, and that he applied the allegory told of Sargon to the Jewish lawgiver. In short, that Exodus was never written by Moses, but was refabricated from old materials by Ezra. And if so, then why should not other symbols and glyphs far more crude in their phallic element have been added by this adept in the later Chaldean and Sabian phallic worship? We are taught that the primeval faith of the Israelites was quite different from that which was developed centuries later by the Talmudists, and before them by David and Hezekiah. All this, notwithstanding the exoteric element, as now found in the two testaments, is quite sufficient to class the Bible among esoteric works, and to connect its secret system with Indian, Chaldean, and Egyptian symbolism. The whole cycle of biblical glyphs and numbers, as suggested by astronomical observations, astronomy and theology being closely connected, is found in Indian exoteric, as well as esoteric, systems. These figures and their symbols, the signs of the zodiac, the planets, their aspects and nodes, the last term, having now passed even into our modern botany, are known in astronomy as sextiles, quartiles and so on, and have been used for ages and eons by the archaic nations, and in one sense have the same meaning as the Hebrew numerals. The earliest forms of elementary geometry must have certainly been suggested by the observation of the heavenly bodies and their groupings. Hence, the most archaic symbols in Eastern esotericism are a circle, a point, a triangle, a square, a pentagon, and a hexagon, and other plane figures with various sides and angles. This shows the knowledge and use of geometrical symbology to be as old as the world. Starting from this, it becomes easy to understand how nature herself, even without the help of their divine instructors, could have taught primeval mankind the first principles of a numerical and geometrical symbol language. Hence we find numbers and figures used as an expression and a record of thought in every archaic symbolical scripture. They are ever the same, with certain variations only, arising from the first figures. Thus the evolution and correlation of the mysteries of cosmos, of its growth and development, spiritual and physical, abstract and concrete, were first recorded in geometrical changes of shape. Every cosmogony began with a circle, a point, a triangle and a square, up to number 9, when it was synthesized by the first line and a circle, the Pythagorean mystic decade, the sum of all, involving and expressing the mysteries of the entire cosmos, mysteries recorded 100 times more fully in the Hindu system than elsewhere, for him who can understand its mystic language. The numbers 3 and 4, in their combination 7, and also 5, 6, 9, and 10, are the very cornerstones of occult cosmogonies. This decade and its 1,000 combinations are found in every portion of the globe. One recognizes it in the caves and rock-cut temples of Hindustan and Central Asia, in the pyramids and lithoi of Egypt and America, in the catacombs of Ozymandias, in the mounds of the snow-capped Caucasian fastnesses, in the ruins of Palenque, in Easter Island, everywhere whither the foot of ancient man has ever journeyed. The 3 and the 4, the triangle and the square, or the universal male and female glyphs, showing the first aspect of the evolving deity, are stamped forever in the Southern Cross in the heavens, as in the Egyptian crux ansata. As well expressed by the author of The Source of Measures. The cube unfolded is in display a cross of the Tao, or Egyptian form, or of the Christian cross form. A circle attached to the first gives the ansated cross numbers 3 and 4, counted on the cross, showing a form of the Hebrew golden candlestick in the Holy of Holies, and of the 3 4 equals 7, and 6 1 equals 7, days in the circle of the week, as 7 lights of the sun. So also as the week of 7 lights gave origin to the month and year, so it is the time marker of birth. The cross form being shown, then, by the connected use of the form 113-355, the symbol is completed by the attachment of a man to the cross. This kind of measure was made to coordinate with the idea of the origin of human life, and hence the phallic form. The stanzas show the cross in these numbers playing a prominent part in archaic cosmogony. Meanwhile, we may profit by the evidence collected by the same author, in the section which he rightly calls the primordial vestiges of these symbols, to show the identity of symbols and their esoteric meaning all over the globe. Under the general view taken of the nature of the number forms, it becomes a matter of research of the utmost interest as to when and where their existence and their use first became known. Has it been a matter of revelation in what we know as the historic age cycle, exceedingly modern when the age of the human race is contemplated? It seems, in fact, as to the date of its possession by man, to have been farther removed, in the past, from the old Egyptians, than are the old Egyptians from us. The Easter Isles in mid-Pacific present the feature of the remaining peaks of the mountains of a submerged continent, for the reason that these peaks are thickly studded with Cyclopean statues, remnants of the civilization of a dense and cultivated people, who must have, of necessity, occupied a widely extended area. On the backs of these images is to be found the ansated cross, and the same modified to the outlines of the human form. A full description, with plates showing the land with the thickly planted statues, also with copies of the images, is to be found in the January number, 1870, of the London Builder. In The Naturalist, published at Salem, Massachusetts, in one of the early numbers, about 36, is to be found a description of some very ancient and curious carving on the crest walls of the mountains of South America, older by far, it is averred, than the races now living. The strangeness of these tracings is in that they exhibit the outlines of a man stretched out on a cross, by a series of drawings, by which from the form of a man that of a cross springs, but so done that the cross may be taken as the man, or the man as the cross. It is known that tradition among the Aztecs has handed down a very perfect account of the deluge. Baron Humboldt says that we are to look for the country of Aztlan, the original country of the Aztecs, as high up, at least, as the 42nd parallel north, whence journeying, they at last arrived in the Vale of Mexico. In that vale the earthen mounds of the far north become the elegant stone pyramidal and other structures whose remains are now found. The correspondences between the Aztec remains and those of the Egyptians are well known. Atwater, from examination of hundreds of them, is convinced that they had a knowledge of astronomy. As to one of the most perfect of the pyramidal structures among the Aztecs, Humboldt gives a description to the following effect. The form of this pyramid of Papantla, which has 7 stories, is more tapering than any other monument of this kind yet discovered, but its height is not remarkable, being but 57 feet, its base, but 25 feet on each side. However, it is remarkable on one account. It is built entirely of hewn stones, of an extraordinary size, and very beautifully shaped. 3 staircases lead to the top, the steps of which were decorated with hieroglyphical sculptures and small niches, arranged with great symmetry. The number of these niches seem to allude to the 318 simple and compound signs of the days of their civil calendar. 318 is the Gnostic value of Christ, and the famous number of the trained or circumcised servants of Abram. When it is considered that 318 is an abstract value and universal, as expressive of a diameter value to a circumference of unity, its use in the composition of a civil calendar becomes manifest. Identical glyphs, numbers and esoteric symbols are found in Egypt, Peru, Mexico, Easter Island, India, Chaldea, and Central Asia. Crucified men and symbols of the evolution of races from God's end. Yet behold science, repudiating the idea of a human race other than one made in our image, theology clinging to its 6,000 years of creation, anthropology teaching our descent from the ape, and the clergy tracing it from Adam 4004 years BC. Shall one, for fear of incurring the penalty of being called a superstitious fool, and even a liar, abstain from furnishing proofs as good as any existent only, because that day, when all the 7 keys shall be delivered unto science, or rather the men of learning and research in the department of symbology, has not yet dawned. In the face of the crushing discoveries of geology and anthropology with regard to the antiquity of man, shall we, in order to avoid the usual penalty that awaits everyone who strays outside the beaten paths of either theology or materialism, hold to the 6,000 years and special creation, or accept in submissive admiration our genealogy and descent from the ape? Not so. As long as it is known that the secret records hold the said 7 keys to the mystery of the genesis of man. Faulty, materialistic, and biased as the scientific theories may be, they are 1,000 times nearer the truth than the vagaries of theology. The latter are in their death agony for every one but the most uncompromising bigot and fanatic. Or rather, some of its defenders must have lost their reason. For what can one think when, in the face of the dead-letter absurdities of the Bible, these are still publicly supported, and as fiercely as ever, and one finds the theologians maintaining that though the scriptures carefully refrain from making any direct contribution to scientific knowledge, they have never stumbled upon any statement which will not abide the light of advancing science. Hence we have no choice but either to blindly accept the deductions of science, or to cut ourselves adrift from it, and withstand it fearlessly to its face, stating what the secret doctrine teaches us, and being fully prepared to bear the consequences. But let us see whether science, in its materialistic speculations, and even theology, in its death rattle and supreme struggle to reconcile the 6,000 years since Adam with Sir Charles Lyell's geological evidences of the antiquity of man, do not themselves unconsciously give us a helping hand. Ethnology, on the confession of some of its most learned votaries, finds it already impossible to account for the varieties in the human race, unless the hypothesis of the creation of several atoms be accepted. They speak of a white atom and a black atom, a red atom and a yellow atom. Were they Hindus enumerating the rebirths of Vamadeva from the Linga Purana, they could say a little more. For, enumerating the repeated births of Shiva, they show him in one kalpa of a white complexion, in another of a black color, in still another of a red color, after which the Kumara becomes 4 youths of a yellow color. This strange coincidence, as Mr. Proctor would say, speaks only in favor of scientific intuition, as Shiva Kumara simply represents, allegorically, the human races during the genesis of man. But it has led to another intuitional phenomenon in the theological ranks this time. The unknown author of Primeval Man, in a desperate effort to screen the divine revelation from the merciless and eloquent discoveries of geology and anthropology, remarking that it would be unfortunate if the defenders of the Bible should be driven into the position of either surrendering the inspiration of Scripture or denying the conclusions of geologists, finds a compromise. Nay, he devotes a thick volume to proving this fact. Adam was not the first man created upon this earth. The exhumed relics of pre-Adamic man, instead of shaking our confidence in Scripture, supply additional proof of its veracity. How so? In the simplest way imaginable, for the author argues that, henceforth we the clergy are enabled to leave scientific men to pursue their studies without attempting to coerce them by the fear of heresy. This must be a relief indeed to Messrs. Huxley, Tyndall, and Sir Charles Lyell. The Bible narrative does not commence with creation, as is commonly supposed, but with the formation of Adam and Eve, millions of years after our planet had been created. Its previous history, so far as Scripture is concerned, is yet unwritten. There may have been not one, but 20 different races upon the earth before the time of Adam, just as there may be 20 different races of men on other worlds. Who, then, or what were those races, since the author still maintains that Adam is the first man of our race? It was the satanic race and races. Satan was never in heaven, angels and men being one species. It was the pre-Adamic race of angels that sinned. Satan was the first prince of this world, we read. Having died in consequence of his rebellion, he remained on earth as a disembodied spirit and tempted Adam and Eve. The earlier ages of the satanic race, and more especially during the lifetime of Satan, may have been a period of patriarchal civilization and comparative repose, a time of Tubal Cains and Jubals, when both sciences and arts attempted to strike their roots into the accursed ground. What a subject for an epic! There are inevitable incidents which must have occurred. We see before us the gay primeval lover wooing his blushing bride at dewy eve under the Danish oaks, that then grew where now no oaks will grow, the grey primeval patriarch, the primeval offspring, innocently gambolling by his side. 1,000 such pictures rise before us. The retrospective glance at this satanic blushing bride in the days of Satan's innocence, does not lose in poetry as it gains in originality. Quite the reverse. The modern Christian bride who does not often blush nowadays before her gay modern lovers might even derive a moral lesson from this daughter of Satan, created in the exuberant fancy of her first human biographer. These pictures, and to appreciate them at their true value, they must be examined, and the volume that describes them are all suggested with a view to reconcile the infallibility of revealed scripture with Sir Charles Lyell's Antiquity of Man and other damaging scientific works. But this does not prevent truth and fact appearing at the foundation of these vagaries, which the author has not dared to sign with his own, or even a borrowed, name. For his pre-Adamic race is not satanic but simply Atlantean, and the hermaphrodites before the latter are mentioned in the Bible, if read esoterically, as they are in the Secret Doctrine. The 7 keys open the mysteries, past and future, of the 7 great root traces, and of the 7 kalpas. Though the genesis of man, and even the geology of esotericism, will surely be rejected by science, just as much as the satanic and pre-Adamic races, yet if the scientists, having no other way out of their difficulties, are compelled to choose between the two, we feel certain that scripture notwithstanding, once the mystery language is approximately mastered, it is the archaic teaching that will be accepted. And that's not all. Our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.